There
Brilliant. So thank you. Thank you for inviting us today to present to you on Stims and Shutdowns. My name is Catherine McAree. I'm a trainee clinical psychologist working in the autism service.
And I'm Anastasia Sedikidis. I'm a clinical psychologist and clinical lead for the autism assessment pathway in Solent NHS.
So what do we aim to cover today? So we want to share a basic understanding of what is stimming, what stimming can look like, what to do if a child is upset by it and wants to stop, when to seek further advice, what CAMS can do or offer for stims, if anything, what is a shutdown and what is meant by it and why it happens, and what can be done to help prevent these, and what can parents do. So stimming in children and young people. So it can be described as self-stimulatory acts that shut out external stimuli and interfere with the person and others' focus. They're highly repetitive and rhythmic motor activities that appear to not have a function. Treatments to control or eliminate or modify or reduce these motor stereotypies remain popular clinically and in research. But people with autism have been resistant to these efforts. So theoretically, stimming has been thought of as having a sensory motor basis. So according to research, stimming occurs as a controllable response in response to too much, not enough, or inadequate sensory processing. So a child or a young person's behaviour may very well be addressing unique sensory needs. So they're behaviours that are self-regulatory. They can be physical, such as fidgeting or hand flapping, clapping or rocking, and they can be verbal, such as humming or echolalia. Visuals, such as watching sparkle of glitter or a rotating motion of a ceiling fan or a fidget spinner. So the sensory spectrum. So people with autism can experience both hypersensitivity and hyposensitivity, so to a wide range of stimuli. Most people have a combination of both. They can experience hypersensitivity to sensory inputs in the environment, such as lights, bright lights, some LEDs. And when children with autism are sensitive to sensory information, it can be called hyposensitive. So these children might seem to seek out sensory experiences. So that could be maybe playing with slime, or maybe having to rub certain textures or touch their hands or their tongue of certain things. And neurotypical people can tend to filter out some of that sensory overload, or can filter some of that out. But for people with autism, that can be more difficult. And it can change depending on the environment too. So there might be less overload at home, could be a safe space at home, whereas at school you can think of noisy corridors, you can think of changing classroom to classroom, you can think of changes of teachers, lots of different changes in the environment that can be difficult for someone with autism. So why do people with autism stim? So it can provide familiar and reliable self-generated feedback in response to unpredictable, overwhelming and novel circumstances. It can provide relief from excessive sensory stimulation, but also from emotional excitation, such as anxiety. So if you think of a noisy supermarket with bright lights, changes of temperature, a young person might begin to stim in that situation to try and regulate and cope with what's going on in the environment. What can it look like? So researchers and clinicians can sometimes wrongly assume that stimming is a voluntary behaviour and that it has an asocial or an antisocial motivation behind it. Therapies continue to treat stimming despite it lacking some strong evidence of its efficacy or actually how ethical it is. This is a list of some examples. So flapping hands, rocking and bouncing, flicking and snapping fingers, hair pulling, walking on tiptoes or pacing, rubbing and scratching the skin, licking, sniffing, stroking objects, excessive blinking, staring at lights and moving objects, repeating words or phrases, repeating sounds and noises, rearranging objects and obsessions with orderliness. And then some harmful stimming, so head banging, biting, punching, excessive rubbing or scratching at the skin, picking at sores or swallowing dangerous items. So I have a video, hopefully it will work. Probably not because technology isn't on our side today. No, but I can send out the link to this. Oh, we have it now.
The people, the lights, the sounds, school can be an overwhelming experience. But repeatedly lining up your pencils in order of color and length might help. Or what about drumming your fingers to a steady beat? Or spinning around in circles, arms outstretched to the world? These kinds of behaviors all fall under the description of restricted and repetitive behaviors. They appear from a young age in people with autism and are one of the condition's core features, alongside problems with social communication. Typically, restricted and repetitive behaviors fall into two categories. Low-order behaviors are motor and sensory in nature and can include hand flapping, rocking back and forth, spinning, playing persistently with objects, and uttering repeated sounds. Some people describe these behaviors as stimming. High-order behaviors are more cognitive and take the form of intensely focused interests, ritualistic habits, and an insistence on sameness and routine. There's scant research exploring these behaviors, but we do know that repetitive movements occur as part of regular development in all young children. Because they persist beyond childhood in those with autism, disruptions in typical development could be involved. Emerging research also shows that when autistic people engage in restricted and repetitive behaviors, their brains show greater activity in the reward circuits, just as eating cake or winning an award might do. That might help explain why many people on the spectrum engage in them regularly. As this research progresses, clinicians and caregivers continue to question how and if they should intervene to stop or control repetitive behaviors. Historically, these behaviors were viewed as having no inherent value, and it was thought best to suppress them. That may still be the case when they are harmful, like with repetitive head banging. But there has been a dramatic change in thinking when it comes to stimming. Many experts now believe that some repetitive behaviors are coping mechanisms, and as such deserve more thoughtful management. In support of that idea, many autistic people describe their repetitive behaviors as a source of focus or calm when they feel overwhelmed or need to manage anxiety. They may need to stim less if they have access to earplugs and sunglasses to buffer against sensory overload, or a new routine to create a greater sense of structure. Some autistic people say they simply enjoy engaging in repetitive behaviors, much like a hobby. Others say they are a way of communicating and expressing emotions. Taking these behaviors away would strip them of these benefits and might cause frustration and withdrawal. Caregivers might enable an autistic relative to perform an activity of interest, like examining train schedules, in a safe space, but establish gentle boundaries, like limiting the amount of time spent on it. Striking a balance between adaptation and acceptance can lead to great things, including new experiences, interests, and talents.
Okay, so as you've probably seen in that video, stimming can relieve anxiety, it can help young people focus, it can also be a form of self-expression. It can help some children and young people to feel safe if they're in a harsh or unfamiliar environment. If people with autism are excited, they might dance or they might hand flap excessively, and that can be a way again of expressing how excited or happy they are. They might stim to distract themselves as well from something that's going on in their mind or some worries. It can help in conversations as well, stimming. So rather than focusing on having to maintain eye contact or the reciprocal nature of conversations, if they feel free to be able to stim and not have to have quiet hands, then they might be able to engage more in that conversation and take in what is being said. So research in a study of 100 autistic adults found that there was a wide range of reasons for stimming, including reducing anxiety, reducing overstimulation, and to calm down. 80% of survey respondents reported that they generally or sometimes enjoyed stimming, with another 11% indicating that their enjoyment depended on which stim they were doing. Yet a percentage of them have been told to not do it. What to do if a child does want to stop stimming? So research and clinicians can wrongly assume that stimming is voluntary and has an antisocial motivation. And as I mentioned previously, therapies do continue to treat those behaviours despite it lacking strong evidence. And normally stimming itself doesn't need to be stopped and it doesn't need a specific intervention. But since it can show that a child is having anxiety or stress, or in some cases it can lead to adverse effects, it's important to know when you need to get a professional opinion about your child's stimming and if it requires any behaviour management interventions. So what to do if a child does want to stop stimming? So modifying the environment so it does not provoke stimming, and promoting social acceptance are key. So again, we might not know what's in the environment, so we do have to do some detective work to try and find out what it might be that could potentially be triggering this behaviour in the home or in the school. Some forms of stimming, though, such as headbanging, are harmful and do warrant sensitive and consensual treatment. So again, how to respond? The most important is to identify the reason behind it. It's important to learn what are their triggers and possibly to tell different stims apart based on their cause. And again, diaries are really good. Keeping notes of what you're seeing in different situations, that can help you maybe start to see a pattern in different stims that you're seeing frequently. And when your child's stimming starts or increases, ask yourself what has changed, what is triggering their behaviour in this environment. Harmful stimming behaviour, so any action such as scratching or picking which breaks the skin. It can also pose infection and pain risks. Also physical aggression such as headbanging or biting or punching towards oneself. That poses a risk of injury, and some actions create a risk because the child engages in the behaviour for a prolonged period. For example, itching one spot on the skin for a long time. And again, this can be self-directed or it could be directed towards other people. The following questions can help to determine whether you need further support. So is there a risk of self-harm or self-injury when my child is stimming? Does it prevent my child from learning? So is it interfering with their ability to learn in the classroom or learn at home? Is stimming socially isolating my child? Does it cause problems for other family members or my child's classmates? And is it causing disruption in my child's classroom? So what is a shutdown then? So a shutdown is a freeze response to sensory overload.
I wonder,
so
sorry, can I interrupt? Can I just, are we going to come back to stimming, or is that kind of the end of stimming? Because I just wondered if people might have some questions about it before we move on. Yeah, would that be okay just for a minute? I don't know if anyone does, but I just thought if anyone's got any questions now before we move on to shutdowns, it might be a good time to to find out, you're welcome to either unmute yourself or put your hand up or put it in the chat box at all. There was a lot to take in there. Have you got anything? So we really like strategies in Reminds for things we can sort of do. I like the idea of keeping a diary to kind of try and identify issues that are coming up. Have you got any other ideas or strategies, you know, particularly if it's harmful or if a child doesn't want to do it? So my daughter, for example, stims quite a lot and will do things very repetitively and say words sort of out loud over and over. And she comes across, you know, she's quite high functioning with her autism, but people make fun of her and people comment on it, and she hates it, but she is compelled to do it. So for children that are really aware that they don't want to be doing these stims, is there anything, particularly when they're at school and sort of away from us, is there any sort of top tips that you might have?
So I can say that one of the things that can be done is to agree with the child on an alternative way of managing. So as Catherine was saying, the first thing is to figure out what's triggering it. It may be anxiety because they are in a social situation, or stimulation, too much stimulation. So agreeing with the child on a more adaptive kind of response of managing that anxiety. It can be, well, fidget spinners or fidget toys are being used. As some people like the soft sensory toys or items. So any alternative, I'm sure you've thought about this already, but it's individualized, isn't it? No, nothing will apply to everyone, but and it also depends on what form it takes. So is it pressure on the skin? Is it do they need to dampen the noise? So if it is pressure on the skin that that would help them, maybe a bracelet, that they can stretch and release so that they get some sensory feedback from that. So it really depends, but some children may find it easier to have their hands in their pockets, have something in their pockets to squeeze or feel.
I'm just thinking of one young person who loved a sour sweet, and that was giving them some sensory feedback, the feeling on the tongue, the overload of the sour, the bitter taste. Sometimes something like that as well can be helpful, especially if there's an oral sensory seeking behaviors there.
That's really helpful, actually. Yeah, sorry, Anastasia, go on.
That's fine. So if they feel they need to say something, so verbal tics or stims, perhaps they can say them in their head. So kind of practicing with them, saying out loud and saying in their head, whether, you know, that may be helpful. But well, it would be helpful to have like a list and maybe of possible stims, and maybe we can write back some alternatives.
Yeah, that would be really helpful, I'm sure, actually. Maybe I'll gather that and send that over to you. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Is there anyone else with anything? I haven't seen anything in the chat box, so we might be.
Would you mind if I had asked a question?
Please do.
I've got two lads, both with ASD, but they're totally different. One of them in particular, and I haven't really got a concern about it, and I want to ask you maybe if it is a type of stim. When he has little toys, he doesn't play a long time on the computer, but when he does, he stims. He's 6'2", but he jumps up and down, and it's like he's going to wear the floorboards out. Obviously, it's sort of, as you were saying, it's probably like a stimulant to him. But then he can always chew his, at different times, he's always chewing his fingers. Would that be classed as type of stimming?
Sorry, I can't hear very well. What is the last thing you said?
He's always got his fingers in his mouth. He's constantly chewing, no matter what he's doing.
Okay, yes. So that could be definitely. So there is the sensory feedback there that he gets from chewing his fingers. So you may want to try. I know there are lots of different types of chewies that people can use to substitute the finger chewing. So have you tried any of those?
We have. He's in year 11 now, but when he was in year 3, he used to chew the pencils at the school on the table, and I mean literally chew them. So we have gone through varied over the years of different things.
So whether something like something in his mouth, something tart or very intense tasting item. Of course, if it's like a piece of candy, it will melt and you'll need more, which is not very healthy. But I mean, many stims are very difficult to manage. We have to be very realistic, and so it's really hard. One of the things that traditionally has been suggested is to try and get their attention to something else, to get them involved in something else. To take them away, take their mind away, and also to going back to what is causing it. If it is excessive stimulation or anxiety about something, then to try and modify the environment and give them breaks in between activities, that they can do their stimming and then come back. So it's a variety of things that you can try.
And again, the excitable bounce, and as you mentioned, that can be a communication of I'm really enjoying this, and I'm really getting I'm having a lot of fun doing this. So that if it's not causing you concern, or if it's not harmful to anyone, I know you mentioned the floorboards maybe, but if it's okay in terms of his safety and things like that, then there is no need to intervene with that, if that's what he enjoys.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's not causing any problem. I just wondered if it was a type of stim.
Yes, it can be. I mean, some of the verbal stims can be tics, can't they? And those are, those are very, very difficult to treat. And they're usually triggered by anxiety. So again, working on the anxiety can be helpful.
Yeah.
But adapting the environment to minimize the impact of the behavior on the child's functioning and the family and the classroom would be what's needed. But it's always an individualized approach, isn't it?
Yeah,
yes.
I think it would be good to get other people's ideas. So for my daughter, when she couldn't stop repeating a word, we used to get her to sing it. In fact, Cam's told us to get her to sing it. And so she started singing it, and then she stopped. It's like it just broke that cycle. And when she couldn't stop chewing things, we got her chewing gum, and we went through lots of different flavors to find the right one. But when we got the right one, then that stopped that cycle. So it's trying to kind of only, like you say, only if it's affecting them. But I think we've probably, within Reminds and all the families, got so many different ideas of what people have. It would be great to gather all of those and kind of create.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. Yes.
All right. Brilliant. Thank you. I don't think there's anything else from anyone. And we can go on to shutdowns. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find the screen that it's on.
The pressure, hey? It always makes it harder to find anything.
I'll share the entire screen and hopefully. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So what is a shutdown then? So it is a freeze response to sensory overload. That typically occur as a result of situation with high demand in one or few of the following areas. So a lack of sleep, a highly stressful or an emotional situation, social situations, situations that require a lot of thinking or planning, and situations that are very active. What you might see during a shutdown, so you might see withdrawal, you might see some avoidance, disengagement, fatigue, quiet, isolated, sadness, space away from others, and reassurance seeking. It can be experienced by people who have an adverse reaction to sensory overload. So both shutdowns and meltdowns are reactions to intense environments, or if the environment becomes too much for someone to process. So how to respond to it? So preemptive planning can help to mitigate against triggers that might lead to a shutdown. Creating an environment that doesn't overwhelm the senses. So for example, allowing children, young people to wear ear defenders in noisy rooms, or dimming lights to create a less harsh ambience. And asking them when they're calm, what would actually be helpful for you? So some people have described shutdowns as having a battery or a phone that's battery is about to go, or if you don't have coverage on your phone, you can still use the phone, you can still do the basic functions, but actually you can't use it for its whole intended use. And that's what some people with autism have described. It's like having a shutdown. It's like, I know kind of what's going on, I can do basic functions, but I'm not at my full capacity. And it can be internally shutting off from the outside world. It can be very individual once again. So some people, if they are responding to a buildup of stress, they can anticipate that and they can take themselves away from that situation. But for other people, they may stay in that situation and not realize actually this is about to lead to me shutting down. And it's self-preservation. It's a way to protect someone from becoming overwhelmed by the environment. The best remedy for a shutdown is giving the person space to rest, recuperate and recover without placing additional demands on them. It can be like a reset for an autistic person. So often parents and teachers, very well meaning, can want to probe further and ask what's wrong, is there anything we can do? And at that time it can be very difficult for someone to think and to react. So actually giving them that space to rest and to recover can help, and then returning back to them after that period to find out what was going on. Is there anything we could have done differently, or if there's anything you would have liked to change in that environment? So the spoon theory, so this is a theory that we have 12 different spoons and at the start of a day, and each of these tasks for someone with autism can use up a spoon. So the emotional energy that it takes for someone to do certain tasks. So again, this can be helpful to share with kids and young people, to show them you've done a lot today. Today has been busy, and that can help them to think, okay, what was leading up to that? What was the stress that was accumulating? And meltdowns and shutdowns, so it can lead to confusion, overwhelm, scared, overload of stress chemicals, and then this can lead to that fight or flight or freeze response. And then meltdowns, tantrums, aggression, self-abuse to escape or to reduce that stimulation. And then shutdown is the withdrawal. So again, shutdowns is similar to meltdowns in that it's an overwhelm, and it is in response to an overwhelming environment. But again, what you might see, it might be more inward, it might be more withdrawal, it might be less explosive than a meltdown, and more self-directed. And that is it. So happy to take any questions on that.
I think it would be good to have some practical ideas to help with shutdowns in terms of, you know, I guess, first of all, are they a bad thing? Maybe not if the sort of young person's protect themselves. It's very challenging if they're at school and they're having them. And I guess some ideas for managing that at school, and also what to do if they're having a shutdown, if they're overwhelmed just getting out of bed in the morning and trying to get them to school. How long do you leave them? Is there a way to try and coax them out of it? Kind of some ideas and some strategies I think might help some people around that.
Yes. Again, it's quite a difficult issue to really manage, and it's quite individualized. So from it is, if a child is so we have the extremes of children refusing to speak in very in new situations. So they're so overwhelmed by anxiety that they refuse to speak, and or they become motionless, and so that's one extreme, and that's more difficult to manage. If it is a matter of not getting out of bed or not moving, we have to look at, is there anything they can do? So can they communicate via writing or via drawing something? So with us also communicating with them in that way, rather than adding to their anxiety by talking to them and trying to coax them to move or do the things that they are really frightened about. And again, it would be helpful to plan ahead and to know that these situations will come up and what may trigger them, and to have a discussion with a young person about this. And they may or may not be able to articulate what triggers these incidents, but parents can perhaps make a list of what they have observed to be those triggers, and get the young person, when they are not in that situation, when they're calm, to identify those triggers, and then to come up with a plan of what might be helpful to them. So they may agree to do a little bit, or to perhaps there is something like, I don't know, some little thing that may help them to calm down, take their mind off. So it may be, you know, singing a song or listening to a particular piece of music, or watching something, or playing with their with something. to get them to kind of calm down and take the edge off, whether something like that might help. I know there are those soft toys that change color by being pushed, you know, just with there is a way to communicate non-verbally using something concrete to let people know they're very anxious and to give them some space. So that's another thing.
I think for us with my children, and we've got a question in a minute, but it was about trying to identify the triggers before they got to the shutdown and trying to give opportunities for them to calm down and recognize and plan in advance how, you know, what to do if they feel that things are starting to get on top of them, how they can let me know with a colored card or with a particular word. And then trying to build in those opportunities to stop it. And then for us, for afterwards, we've used coping and resilience plans, which we've got a lot of on our website. We've got resources and we've got a video on YouTube all about that, which then helps when they're calm afterwards to then plan, okay, what do you need me to do next time? How can we stop getting into this phase? And so having those sort of really practical tools, which we've got lots of, so if anyone needs those, they can access them on the website, or let me know and I can send it over. But it was very much about spotting it before. We've got a question from someone that says, how can I help my child age 11 following a shutdown who has selective mutism and doesn't understand her own emotions?
Okay. So this would be using an emotion understanding kind of like the incredible 5-point scale that we often recommend to as a way of teaching them about emotions, and that's available, you know, online. It's free. It can be used, and you can use very, very simple words for emotions. Feeling things are too much, or things are confusing, and very simple words that they can use, and again using some kind of a visual to let people know they're experiencing anxiety. Sorry, to read the question again. So rather than trying to asking questions about how they're feeling, why, what happened. I mean, it's very natural for parents to panic when their children are in distress. And so we may tend to ask lots of questions and tell them, try to coax them out of the situation, their behavior, which actually has the opposite effect because it further overwhelms them. So by parents staying calm and waiting for the young person to signal in a non-verbal way that they feel good or bad. It can be as simple as that. So that is an expression of how they're feeling at the time. But when they're not in that state, parents need to work on teaching them about emotions, and to help them then later on when they do become anxious and distressed or sad, to perhaps be able to verbalize. But at the time of anxiety, of an acute situation, the best thing that parents can do is to just stand back and give them time and space to recover.
Yeah, I think I spent a long time trying to fix shutdowns with my son, and it's only in recent years, now he's an adult, we've realized that actually they're okay, they're good, they help him cope, and I need to stop panicking and trying to you know, come up with all these strategies and actually just let him, as long as he's okay and it's not impacting, you know, and he's all right with it, that's his coping strategy. And so, yeah, okay. Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, you know, with us as parents feeling so distressed, distraught, and anxious for our children, we actually we want to make things better for them. But actually, in this situation, it helps to
contain it, doesn't it? It helps to co-regulate together. So if we're calm, then we're able to better regulate our children as well. So they seek us for that. You know?
Absolutely. Is there a time for both, for the stims and the shutdowns? When do we need to be worried? If we're trying to be calm and keep it under control, is there a point when we think, okay, actually, this is too much, we need to get some extra advice? Where do we go? When is the right time to ask CAMHS, if ever? Is it a CAMHS issue, or is it actually not really? What can we have some advice around that, please?
Yeah, that's I don't know that it's ever a situation where you would need CAMHS intervention, whether it would be unless it is so extreme that it takes such a long time, the shutdowns last for a long time, and there is possible depression as part of it. I mean, in very extreme cases, that there is, this needs to be addressed, because a child, if a young person cannot move, cannot do anything for long periods of time or days, or then that definitely needs to be addressed. And
they're eating, they're drinking, their sleep, if those basic functions are really being impacted to an extreme degree, then we would definitely recommend that's when CAMHS input would be helpful.
Okay, so it has to be the extreme end. And are there places you can get just general advice like we're having today? But if you've got a question, if you're worried about stims or shutdowns, but it's not quite at that extreme level, do you know of anywhere else that we can get advice? You know, would it be your GP, or are there sort of organizations?
I think your organization and other organizations that support families. I'm not sure that the GPs would be able to help. I know this is related, the selective mutism aspect, where you where there's children will not speak when they are in school, for example. Speech therapy can help out with that. But I think that another thing to consider, I've mentioned that before, but using non-verbal means of communicating. So whether children can write things. So the example I have is of a young lady who, and I know there are lots of autistic people who have this difficulty. They cannot order at a restaurant. They cannot buy anything in a shop if they need to speak to someone. So writing, having a like a laminated card where they can write and rub off. So that has very little. It's much less demanding. And also, you know, practicing, knowing that these are the situations that the person is going to shut down in some way or other, to plan ahead and to practice with them what they will do when they go in a shop, what will they say. So having these scripts and practicing the skill of writing things down. and practicing dialogues that are likely to happen in real life. So providing them that, that support, and then hopefully as they get help, as they get more comfortable with this nonverbal communication, they may decide to say a few words gradually. So that's
that's certainly something we've done with my son. Is he shuts down for long periods of time, but he is now sometimes, not always, able to write it down on a whiteboard, and that's what he certainly did when he was at school, is just write it down, even if it was just a no. And often it was, or just a one-word response, but that was another. See, I think as well as collecting ideas for what to do with stims and things, I think it would be really good to have some practical ideas from Reminds families about how they help their children and support them when they're having a shutdown. So that might be another thing we'll look to do, so we'll have some information. Okay, got one other question, which says, I've not experienced a shutdown before. Recently, this person's got a teenager with avoidance attachment, ran off from school and walked very dangerously for 4 hours before he came around. How can I help him make use of some resources not to get this heightened state in the future, please?
Well, again, going back to the triggers, what has triggered this, and planning ahead, perhaps, agreeing with a young person of a safe space that they can go to when they become heightened, and maybe practicing going to that space when they're not extremely heightened. So just identifying a safe space for them. Maybe they can have some personal items, that the comforting items in that space. It may be related to kind of need to expend some energy. Maybe they can be somewhere where they can, like a trampoline, where they can, instead of running off, to just jump up and down to regulate themselves as well. But again, a pre-planned strategy with the young person.
Yes, I think those coping and resilience plans again would be really useful. And Alison, I'm happy to link you to those resources if you need it. Okay. So haven't had any other questions come out. Has anyone else got anything else they want to ask? If not, sorry, go on.
Just a last thought. I don't know how many people use the comic strips with their children. Whether if you have problems with a child not getting up in the morning, not wanting to school, for example, perhaps think about whether something had happened the day before, or they anticipate something happening during the day and they cannot face it, they become overwhelmed. Perhaps, the evening before, they can have a catch up on how the day went using the comic strips rather than an actual verbal conversation, and perhaps about the next day, and kind of preparing and thinking about the next day, and having a plan of safe things to do to help take the edge off.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always good to have that. We always had a little key ring with lots of different ideas of things you could do when it was all getting too much, and ways of coping. So yeah, I think that's a really good idea. And picking your time, isn't it? Don't do it the second they get out of school, or even an hour after. It's, for my children, it's always when they're supposed to be in bed that then they want to sit and talk about everything else. But actually, that's a good time. It sort of works for them. Yes. Okay. I don't think we've got any other questions. So thank you ever so much. I'm going to stop recording.